Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 6 of Heavy Hitters, the review series for the SUVs and trucks that are featured on GT6. And in this episode we're featuring what many of the cars that I feature in my videos are, underappreciated. And this car certainly is. You don't see very many people using the Toyota RSC, which is of course this car. Now there are two versions of the car. There's the road version, if you will, which is this version here, which costs 300,000 credits. And there's also a rally version, which costs 1 million credits. So both of them are, for what they are, pretty expensive. But obviously in this episode, we're featuring the road version. I will be featuring the rally version in this series as well at some future time. But for now, obviously, we're discussing the road version. So for 300 grand, which makes it one of the more expensive SUVs, what does it have to offer? Because the SUV category, although not particularly well populated on Gran Turismo, is still a fiercely competitive one. So if Toyota's going to make a mark in the category, it's got to have something special going for it. So what does this car have to offer? Well, fully tuned, it sits at 565 pp. So, okay, not too high, not too low. And it puts out 546 horsepower. Incidentally, you can actually turbocharge or supercharge this SUV. Now, both of course have their merits, but the supercharger does give you the bigger numbers, higher PP, higher power, etc. And it puts out 582 pound-feet of torque. So interestingly, more torque in relation to power, which is typically a trait of a muscle car. But the real thing that sets this apart, and is its biggest potential advantage over its rivals, is its weight. This SUV, which is technically more of a coupe crossover than a fully fledged SUV, only weighs 1,110 kilos. So for the SUV category, it's one of the lightest models you can get. And thanks to that low weight, even with its more modest power than many of its rivals, it still produces a very respectable 492 horsepower per tonne. But what's it like to drive? Because it's got a mix of seemingly good things and things which are perhaps not so great. The weight is very good, the power to weight ratio is very good, the body style is quite compact and very sporty and purposeful looking, very muscular. It almost has a military kind of look to it. But at the same time, it does have far less power and torque than many of its rivals. So, is its performance any good? What's it like to drive? Well, to discuss its driving style first, the handling is a bit surprising, to be honest. Now, it's certainly not bad, but it does take a lot more practice and fine-tuning than you'd expect. Being a Toyota maker, as they are, of mainstream performance vehicles, and having a long history of performance vehicles, you'd think it was the kind of car that you could just jump in and drive fast. And although to some extent that's true, the handling is quite temperamental, surprisingly so. And that's primarily down to tuning, especially the differential. You have to select how you tune your differential, but also your suspension, your power, your weight, etc. on this car very selectively. Because if you do it wrong, the handling is quite annoying, because the turn-in on this car is, not surprisingly for a relatively compact and very light vehicle, is very good. In fact, in low-speed tight corners, it can actually outmaneuver pretty much any other SUV in the game, which makes it perfect potentially for city tracks and rally tracks. However, on higher speed corners, that initially impressive turn-in can do one of two things. See, half the time it turns into chronic understeer, and other times it turns into a random drift. So the handling is very temperamental and somewhat unpredictable, even with fine tuning. So if you're looking for an easy car to drive, I would not recommend the RSC, because it does require more tuning than most to get the best out of. But when you do get the best out of it, it certainly has its uses, and in its particular uses, it's a pretty much class-leading SUV. But what about performance, especially straight-line performance? Well, ironically, the top speed on this particular SUV is actually faster than the most powerful SUV in the game, the Chevy Silverado. This SUV does over 220 miles per hour without NOS or draft, which is very impressive for a vehicle of its power. And the acceleration off the line with a drag tune, well, it can hit 60 miles per hour in 1.3 seconds. And take that information as you will. But off the line and for top speed, it's an incredibly competitive car, and the handling, although not the easiest to drive, is potentially very competitive, especially for its PP, certainly for its power, and on certain tracks, especially tight twisty tracks. So overall, is it worth 300 grand? Well, it's a concept car, many of them are expensive, and it's certainly very quick, especially in a straight line. And yes, I would say overall it is worth buying at least once so that you can experience a car that's truly different. And if you're looking for a competitive SUV, yes, it certainly is a good car to buy. So that's it for this review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.